Hey there, welcome to another Biblical History on the Go. Today, we're talking about another current event, because there are a lot of current events these days that are relevant to Christianity and just everything. So, today we're going to be talking about the opening of the Jerusalem embassy, which happened yesterday. So, the embassy opened yesterday, and there was protesting going on, but that protesting turned into rioting as well, and as a result, there were 58 Palestinians who were killed. Now, I've noticed the news media has been formatting their headlines in such a way to say, specifically, and this is just about everyone's headline, Jerusalem embassy opens as Palestinians are killed. Now, it is a very biased way to put it, considering that it makes it sound like we're going to open something and we're also going to kill people while we do it. The two situations are unrelated in that the U.S. is opening a U.S. embassy in Jerusalem, and the Palestinians are rioting at the borders of the West Bank, and the IDF force has to stop them from causing any damage or obviously harming any of the Israeli people, which they most certainly would do if they got through into Israel. Which is why there is a wall there. Now, the issue of the West Bank, the Palestinians, and the Israelite people is a matter that is absolutely rooted in biblical history. And it's the reason why the nation of Israel in 1948 was established by the U.S. government, because the Israelite people, for one, exist. It's proven by genetics. We know that there is genetically distinct data to identify the Israelite people. I have some small percentage of Israelite of DNA as well. Some people have more. So, like, Jewish people are not. They exist, right? So, in order to understand this situation, there's a lot going on here. So I'm just gonna break it down. And let me just say, just right off the bat, I think there's something very fishy with what Trump is doing. I don't support Trump at all. I think he's an idiot. And he just happens to have a way with coaxing or conning people. As we've seen, at least in America, we've seen through documentaries, through understanding his tax records and the way he has handled his money, and the way he has handled people who handle his money. For instance, like starting a university that wasn't accredited and getting money from students through tuition, where graduating they don't get any jobs or anything because they aren't studying at an accredited university. But he gets money from the students, he gets money from the teachers, he gets money from his companies, all which fell through real estate, where he had people just start building things in New York, buildings for him, to which he never paid his contractors. Of course you're going to get money if you're making use of things that you aren't paying for. So no, I don't support Trump. Do I support his decision to make Israel the capital of Jerusalem, or Jerusalem the capital of Israel as opposed to the West Bank? That is a question that we will get to, because I don't think it comes down to that. I think it comes down to something bigger. So the origin of this story goes back to the Old Testament of the Bible. So I'm not going to get into everything. In fact, if you want to know what the Bible is about, just check out my first video. It's like the Bible in 26 minutes. I literally tell you what is in each book of the Bible very quickly so you can understand. You don't need to read the entire thing to get what's going on. Each book of the Bible had specific information, and it gets more granular. You can learn about the people, learn about specifically what happened in each of their lives and their situations. But to get the gist of what's going on, it's in the Old Testament after the Exodus. The Exodus is famously the story of Moses. He parts the Red Sea, which you could actually check out on Google Earth. You can see, because we have data today. This is how technology works. You can go and check it out in the sea charts, because we have essentially every ocean, every sea mapped, the floors. And you can see there is a flat pathway all the way across the Red Sea from where they would have had to cross. Not the entire thing. With a space, I want to say about 100 feet wide, flat land from shore to shore, and then a massive, like 900-foot drop on either side. So if the water was ever parted at any point, that would have to be the point where they crossed. The fact that there's a land bridge there doesn't make any sense, but it's there. And this is also where there have been archaeological excavations in the past where people have found what they assume are wheels and chariots and axles and even weaponry. They just didn't get enough funding to place it in a time period, although water is the great preserver of all things. So it could be done, it could be checked, but since those archaeologists who did these things long ago when we didn't have this information have died, people have not picked up that information. And especially because in the world of archaeology, biblical archaeology is sort of the redhead stepchild, and people often like to call that hokum, as if like nothing in the Bible could have ever happened at all. Those people didn't exist, which is stupid to think that a historical document dating way back further than anything else we've got, legitimately readable, that is not worth reading. And of course that is a religious bias, because people don't want to believe in God, so they kind of throw the baby out with a bathwater, which is just absolutely not scientific at all. So with the whole situation with Trump, after the Exodus, you get the Israelite people. They settle in the Middle East, and essentially all of the Middle East was conquered by these ancient Israelite people, and I think they numbered somewhere close to 1 million, but they weren't quite at that number. Now there were lots of other nations, and specifically there were 7 other nations that were bigger and stronger than they were. This is in Deuteronomy. You can see this is what God says. He says he's going to take them into the Promised Land. Promised Land is the Middle East, land flowing with milk and honey, meaning the fertility of it all, and that he would give them the strength that they need to conquer all these nations. Why? Who cares? So God gave them that ability. If God didn't exist, then they would have died. They wouldn't have been able to fight off 7 nations, but they did. And even I think 3 of those nations they fought off in one day. There's lots of magnificent stories in the Bible about these battles. Specifically, one case where they were fighting, I believe, the Amalekites. It said that the sun itself was stopped in the sky so that they'd have more time. Now, these are fantastic stories and no way to corroborate them at all. However, this is what the Israelites have recorded as happening. Moreover, whether or not you believe that the Israelite people actually had this situation, that it actually happened the way it did, or that way it says, we have to consider the fact that at least the war happened. Why? Because if the war did not happen, sorry, there's a mosquito in my car. There we go, got it. If the war did not happen, then why are the Israelite people in existence? They should have died off. There would be no place for them, because they'd be dead. So the fact that the Israelite nation managed to sustain themselves in this land means either they were already there, with a large army, and none of this God stuff happened. They were just a people. They made up their own origin story, in which case they were the first inhabitants. If not, then something crazy did happen to get them into that land in the first place, because they accept the history that they were not there first, but then that they were given this land by their God. Now, the people who were there prior to the Israelite people, God told them to eliminate these people. Essentially, genocide. Yes. Now, that's another topic, and I believe I covered it in one of my videos. If not, let me know, because it's an easy topic to cover. Especially in basically, it comes down to this. In old times, in ancient times, regardless of what culture you're a part of, it's a warring period in history, in man's history. And no matter where you went, there were always countries warring. I say countries, they weren't as big as they are now, typically, but they were always warring against each other constantly. It was a very Viking-esque state of the world. It wasn't just Vikings, it was every culture. And in fact, you see this in the Old Testament with Abraham, before Israelite was a thing. Before Israel, or Jacob, the person whose name was changed to Israel, before he was a thing, Abraham had to go save his nephew Lot from this place that he was trapped in. And there were these kings with armies that were just constantly warring against each other. And in fact, there was a group of 5 kings that had, like, not this nation, but this affiliation with each other. And Abraham and his people had to fight against them. So it is a very interesting time to be alive, where it didn't matter what you believed. You would be killed if somebody felt that they didn't care for you to be alive. There were no civil rights. There's no equality. It's just, this is what the world is. So for people to get upset or offended by this, nobody cares. They didn't care then. And me personally, I don't care now. That's just history. If you don't like it, we'll invent a time machine and go ahead and try to make people stop fighting each other. But this is what happened. The Israelite people ended up in this land where they did not initiate the fight, but the people themselves heard, everyone, all these nations, these 7 nations, heard about what happened in Egypt. Egypt at the time was the greatest army in the world. They had conquered just about everything. And for that army to be destroyed by God, because the Israelites weren't fighters, for that army to be destroyed by God made these other nations scared for their nation. So when the Israelites started coming through, they knew what was going to happen. They knew they were coming to take the land, and they attacked first, because they figured, okay, well, this is just a bunch of people who are slaves. They don't have any army experience, and so they attacked. However, in this miraculous situation, God was on their side, or if you want to say luck, and the Israelites won every single one of these battles. And in fact, according to the Bible, most of these cases, they didn't even lose any people. So what ends up happening is the Israelites settle into this land. God tells them to kill off these people because, of course, at those times, vengeance was commonly taught. People would raise, for instance, if you kept the women and the children, they would raise their children to hate their fathers. Why? Because they'd say, okay, well, this man killed your father. Your father was an Amalekite or whatever it was. And they would teach them the plot. And the idea being that they would try to take the land back by murdering everyone who was there. So that's why they were given those commandments. The Israelites did not oblige. And you might say, oh, okay, well, good. Well, not good, because through that, there were many Hitler situations in the Old Testament where people constantly, eventually, rose up being remnants of these nations that were supposed to be wiped out, and instead they didn't. And so there was this vengeance idea laid down the line. For instance, Haman, in the story of Esther, who tries to, during one of the exiles, he tries to eliminate all the Jewish people, even though the land of Israel has been taken over by the Persian Empire, and he tries to kill the rest of the people off, not knowing that Esther herself was a Jew and her family Mordecai, who was one of her cousins, who was a guard for the king, was also a Jew, and this plan almost worked out, because Haman had convinced the king that he was going to, or that these people couldn't be trusted and that they needed to be killed because they were plotting against the king. So he tried to kill everyone, and Esther eventually gets the courage to tell the king, I'm a Jew and this guy's plotting against me and everyone who is part of my family. And the king turns it around, kills Haman. So this is not the first time those Hitler kind of situations happen. Obviously, Hitler is one of the situations in our modern times. Why did Hitler want to kill just the Jewish people? What did they have to do with anything? Especially when it comes to the Aryan race idea, that the Germans were perfect genetically and everything. But then why kill just the Jews? Wouldn't it be kill everyone who is not a Jew, or who is not German? And that wasn't the case. The Jews were singled out. And obviously there's anti-Semitism there, which you could look into because the history is still fresh. So back to these exiles. So that's just the period, the age that the world was in at the time, early on in humanity's history. And the Israelites didn't clear out the people, and so they lived among these people, and there was mixing of religion, mixing of ideas and everything, and the Israelite people ended up turning away from their own God, who gave them that land in the first place. As a result, they were exiled from their land, because that was a promise that was made by their fathers in the Exodus period. God said specifically to them, if you follow my commandments, you'll be fine. I'll take care of you. I'll keep your land in peace. If you turn away from me, I will no longer protect you. They figured this out too late twice. The first time was the Assyrian Empire, or the Persian Empire, and that was the story. Esther comes in there. And then eventually, the king allows the Israelites to go back to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem, which is their capital. The capital of the nation of Israel was Jerusalem. And they built, the people eventually came back, and then they denied God again. They kind of turned away, and everything fell apart again. But this time, when the Babylonian Empire came in and took over everything essentially in the world, they were the strongest empire at that point, the Persians before them. So when the Babylonian Empire came through, the people realized they had denied God again, and God wasn't going to save them. He was going to tear them apart, and he did. And this is also the last point in the Old Testament you hear about the Ark of the Covenant. People say, oh, it's in Ethiopia, it's here, it's there. No, the priests, specifically says, the priests they found the book of the law, which is what those blessings and cursings for if they followed God or not. This is where this was. In the house of Solomon. The house of the Lord was the house of Solomon, and then they also had the temple. So they found this book in the temple, in the house of the Lord, and they realized they'd screwed up, and they realized that the nation was going to be destroyed. They took the ark and they hid it in the house of the Lord, not in the temple. People get that mixed up because obviously they haven't read the Bible. And even if they have read the Bible, they skipped over the details because people often will just go through and say, oh, yeah, done with that chapter. They aren't really looking closely to see what's going on. But it wasn't hidden in the temple. It wasn't put in the temple. The ark was taken out of the temple and put in the house of the Lord, Solomon's house, which has not yet been discovered. However, there are excavations going on currently in Jerusalem, year by year, and I'm pretty sure they're close to finding it, because that's where it is. And the walls have been moved because of the second destruction of Babylon. The walls have been pushed inward. So Jerusalem, the city, is actually smaller than it was on the north side, and on the north side is where those excavations are happening, where they have currently found the house of a priest, at the very least, considering it had multiple rooms, essentially a mansion, multiple cisterns, which is a big thing in Israel. Water is not common, and you have to pay for it everywhere you go, and wells, and Christian motifs as well. So this is certainly something that was around in the first century of Jesus. and it goes essentially under the city and like into the city, like it's a giant hill, and this excavation, this location has been forgotten about for so long that people don't realize it actually goes into the city, which there's a quarry. Solomon's Quarry is what they call it. The city is built on top of an open quarry, and that's also where they get the water. It's an underground source. The Gihon Spring is what they call it. Gihon is one of the rivers in Genesis, one of the rivers that connects to the Tree of Life. There's 4 of them: Tigris, Euphrates, Pishon, and Gihon. Pishon is gone. Tigris and Euphrates are still active. They've moved around, so they no longer connect to Israel. However, this one spring, being underground, has not shifted, and it's still in the same location. But that's another speculation. So the Babylonian Empire essentially dissolved the nation of Israel. And during that time, this is where you get the prophets, all the stories of the prophets, the minor prophets and the major prophets, which is a kind of I don't know what the word is, but basically minor prophets are not lesser than the major prophets. They're just considered lesser academically because people don't understand what their significance is. The minor prophets are more important because all of them spoke about the end times, which have not yet occurred. They weren't talking about the destruction of Israel. They were talking about the judgment of the entire world, and they were saying things that are only relevant in absolute end times, when Jesus is to return and the Father comes to earth. So the other prophets, the major prophets, the ones we know about, Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, these guys, they prophesied about the coming of Jesus. But moreover, they were alive during the second exile of Israel. This is a point in time. This is relevant because this is the point in time where Israel is no longer a nation, and they will not be a nation again until Jesus' time, which is like 500 years later. And then after that, with the rebellion after Jesus' death, and the exile and execution of the Christian people, the nation was again ransacked and destroyed, and I believe 70 AD, I think, around then. And they were kind of just systematically attacked and destroyed, and especially by the Muhammad and Islam. His efforts to destroy all the Jews nearly succeeded, which spawned the Crusades, and there's really just the Jews are kind of scattered around the world at that point. And then it comes to modern history, where after the World War, where the Jews were systematically murdered, 6 million, and there is no way to explain the grandness of that number. 6 million people murdered. That is just genocide. Is not a strong enough word to explain what happened in that situation in such a few years. It was so systematic. But the Israelite people were recognized again as a nation because they were being sought out wherever they were to be murdered, to kill off their people. And it had everything to do with their birthright, and had everything to do with the land of Israel and their supposed blessing that nobody believes in, but everyone wants to murder them for. And they were given the opportunity to go back to their homeland, because they know their children were told by their grandparents and grandparents of grandparents. It just goes on and on through history, back to when they were living there in Israel. And this is why they always say next year in Israel at the Passover dinners, because the Jews were scattered so far. It's just what happened. And so in 1948, the U.S. government recognized Israel, that area, which is the land of the tribe of Judah, recognized that as a place where the Israelite people could go back to, the Jews. And we allowed them to go back. Now, this displaced some Palestinians, especially they kind of pushed them to the West Bank because we gave them that land that they had been living in up until this point for, you know, what, 1,000 years, however many it's been. But this is the situation. The Israelite people who had been murdered, who have been systematically destroyed, were given the opportunity out of pity to go back to their land, the land which was taken from them in the first place, because we're not talking about ancient times where people were just killing each other for fun. But in relatively recent history. And this made the Palestinian people mad. For one, the Palestinian people, being primarily Muslim, don't believe that the Israelite people have the right to exist. Their end-time prophecy is the destruction, the murder of every single Jewish person on the entire planet, completely wiped out, genocide. This is end-time prophecy for them. They want the Israelite people dead. So to say these Israelite people are now going to take your home is an affront to their existence. So naturally, they don't care for it. But as a result, we have this West Bank situation where now the Palestinians are living in the West Bank. And then, of course, Trump comes along. The worst person for any of this situation. I don't even call him religious. I doubt he is religious at all. But he certainly plays on the heartstrings of the religious public. He has mass-produced his message to religious people, and this is how he came into power, and this is how he gets his ideas and everything done. He tells them that everything he does is essentially for God, because of God. Mike Pence is his religious backer, and this is how he gets the authority to do everything that he does. It's not because he's religious or because he cares about God at all. He only cares about himself, which is obvious. But he uses the ignorance of the Christian people, of the church, to fulfill every one of his goals, because they will back him, because they believe that he is God sent. And this is exactly how the Crusades happened. Manipulation of the Christian masses. So I don't agree with that. Being a Christian, I am not for Donald Trump, because it's stupid and it's completely against everything the Bible says. My last video talks about that. It even puts the biblical verses that says he's a bad for the position. Check that out. So this is why we have this West Bank situation, and with the opening of the Jerusalem embassy, that further exacerbates the situation, because the Palestinians have been protesting. And now we say for sure, and we've opened up this embassy in Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and they are livid. And as a result, they've taken to rioting. And rioting only springs hatred and pain and suffering. You have trained soldiers who are trying to keep you from destroying this wall constantly, and you start attacking them. Not everyone, obviously. You know, there's lots of people from the West Bank who came to protest, but then there were also instigators, and these instigators are dealt with force. Should not be deadly force. I don't agree with that, but with force. And as a result, innocent people get hurt, because they are also there where these instigators are putting them in danger. So it's a super delicate situation. Obviously, I agree with the fact that the Israelite people should have, that small spot in the nation of Israel, and that it should be their capital. Just because the Palestinian people were there slightly before the modern Jewish people came in, the Israelite people were still there before that. It was their nation, and for a long time they ruled the world, essentially. So to deny them that and say you have no place in this world, I think is a travesty. Now, according to end time prophecy, someone, the Antichrist, will find a way to make peace in the Palestine area by splitting up the nation of Israel, currently the tribe of the land of Judah. They will allow the Palestinian people to live in that land. Now, as time goes on, I'm fairly convinced it's Trump, because he is stupid, yet his words, they hold. And that's it. Not his promises, but his words have power, and that's a dangerous thing, especially for someone as conceited as he is. And so that's another video. Check out my videos on the Antichrist and whatnot. But that's the situation, and that's why it's so complicated. And I just wanted to give you a little biblical history on it. So thanks for listening, and talk to people about this, because especially if you know Christians, ask them about what do you think about the situation, and try to get more than one word answers and just shallow, oh well, I believe in it because they're God's people. That's a stupid reason to believe in it. They need to understand why is it that you believe in this, what makes this situation as delicate as it is. Why is this right, why is this okay? Really press them for those answers, because if they don't know, then they are just in the wrong just as much as anyone else is, who blindly accepts something, whether it's true or not, whether it's right or not. You are not in the right if you don't know what's going on and you just blindly accept it, because you'll blindly accept anything, and that's a dangerous place to be. Matthew 7:22 again. Jesus says lots of people who do good things are going to hell. So it's not about what we do. It's about making the relationship and what we understand. So thanks for watching, and have a good one.